Last March, everyone's life took a drastic turn when the COVID 19 pandemic became a national threat. I was about midway through my junior year in high school, enjoying a relatively average Friday until I heard the PA system go off. And it was bizarre to hear the lady on the speaker spend 10 to 15 minutes informing us of all the activities, including every sport and every club that would be canceled indefinitely. She capped off by mentioning the entire school would enter a shutdown period for 2 weeks, effective immediately. But once those 2 weeks passed, they upped the time to a set date that was about a month in the future. And once that date came and went, they decided to cancel the year entirely. Full shutdown on my junior year. Now, the country in general actually acted very similarly to the public schools, as we saw all public venues, from restaurants to movie theaters, shut down completely. But after about a year of this pandemic, I feel confident in saying that this was not the proper response given the circumstance. And although we have eased some of these lockdowns as virus numbers have dropped, I believe that they should be lifted entirely. And I'll show you why with a couple of points, as well as address the opposing argument. So, to start, I'll mention the economic failure that these lockdowns had a huge part in causing. So, as we know, a major problem in our economy today is the growing economic divide. And I'll start with a stat from Sergei Klebnikov's. Sorry if I botched that name, that's a tough one. But he wrote in a Forbes article titled Five Big Numbers That Show Amazon's Explosive Growth During the Coronavirus Pandemic. That was the title. In this article, he wrote Jeff Bezos is the world's richest person. Forbes estimates his net worth at $178.5 billion, up from the $114.7 billion at the end of 2019. As you can see, about a $60 billion increase. But that's not really the problem. If one person gets richer, that's fine. The problem is that the rest of the world went down while he went up. And this was actually shown in a PNAS study. It was titled The Impact of COVID 19 on Small Business Outcomes and Expectations. In the study, they found 43% of businesses had temporarily closed, and nearly all of these closures were due to COVID 19. So, as you can see, the rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and this is because the rich and elite had the resources to adjust to the lockdowns, whereas the smaller businesses and really the rest of the world did not. So they were forced to shut down and take losses while the rich and elite continued to profit at a high level. The other economic problem that it caused was the unemployment. So fast.org actually mentions this in their article where they say the unemployment rate peaked at a level not seen ever since data collection started in 1948 in April 2020, before declining to a still high level in December. So as you can see, people were suffering, they needed help. So what did our government do to respond? They rolled out mass stimulus checks through several bills that added unsustainable amounts of debt. And this was actually shown in a jo.gov article. In this article, they write the federal debt was $26.9 trillion, which was up 4.2 trillion from last year, due largely to the government's COVID-19 response. So in the end, the economic result from the shutdowns was a growing economic divide, unemployment, and mass debt to our country. All things that need to end by ending the lockdowns. The next point, and this is more important to me, is the mental health. I'll start with the local scene. This is really my main point of the whole thing. So, Cameron Southwick, this is my ASB president. He wrote a letter that was eventually read at the Senate floor. In this letter, he wrote, students from Norco High School and Vista Marietta High School have mentioned that school has become tiresome, difficult, and unmotivational to an extent far beyond what it may seem to be. Part of this letter, he mentions 95% of the freshman class had at least one F or failing grade, and it is because of these lockdowns. People are losing their motivation, they're losing their will. And the saddest part of this letter actually was when he mentions that at LUSD, which is my district, we had 3 students lose their lives to suicide. And again, all of these were caused in some part by the lockdowns. And the only way to reverse them, give kids a chance to be kids and enjoy their lives, is to end these lockdowns. Now, what is the argument for lockdowns? The main one is public safety. The goal of those lockdowns were to keep people apart. But what I found is that this does not work. So when you shut down everything, people resort to private venues like people's homes through parties and things that you cannot control any virus protocol. You can't enforce mask or social distancing at a party. That's will not work. And this was actually shown in New York Times' virus tracker, where the peak of the virus came within 2 weeks of the holiday season, reaching up to 300,669 new cases on January 8th. At this time, businesses were still as restricted as they've ever been, but all those private events, like the parties and the family gatherings, still occurred, and that is why we saw the cases get so high at that period right after the holiday season. But you might be wondering, well, if you opened everything up, wouldn't the numbers still look the same? Actually, no, they wouldn't. And this is because public venues have an obligation and legal responsibility to keep employees and citizens slash customers safe. So opening them makes sense because they can enforce the mask, they can enforce the social distancing to keep people safe. And when you open up more of these scenarios, naturally there will be less of those dangerous private parties and gatherings. So, really, if you care about safety, you should be in favor of reopening. So, to conclude, although we may be in the back end of this pandemic, I think that this is still an important topic to discuss because I think it's inevitable. There will be a future virus or another pandemic, maybe even a mutation of COVID-19. And we need to remember the failure of these lockdowns because we absolutely cannot take the same course of action. The economy, people's mental health, and more importantly, their lives will be at risk if we do. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.